Welcome to Unit 3. In this unit, we're going to be talking about measures in descriptive statistics. Things like a mean or a median, percentiles. A lot of these things you may have heard before or even used in your other classes, but we're going to be talking about them a lot more in depth in terms of when they're useful, when to avoid them, when to avoid certain ones and pick a different kind of measure. But before we do that, I really need to review what we talked about before with random variables. So remember, random variables are what we deal with in statistics, which are different than what we would maybe deal with in a math class, where in a math class you're trying to solve for what the value, a number of a variable is, and that's the only number it could possibly be. My x must be 3, it can't be 4, or something like that. For us, a random variable is almost like a category of data. Right? So I could have, say, student age be a random variable, right? So that's a kind of data that I could be gathering, student age. But I actually don't have any student ages. And as soon as I go out and say, Emma is 23 years old, then that stops being a random variable. That starts being what we call a realization in statistics. That's the formal word for it. I'm always going to call it just an observation because it's, I think, more clear what I'm talking about. I've observed a piece of data. But that's an observation of a random variable. The random variable is still just student age. It's not about any particular student, and it's not a particular age. It's saying that's the variable associated with all the distribution and all this stuff that could go along with it. So I make a note on the first lecture slide that I have here that we usually use capital letters for random variables and lowercase letters for observations. I can get back to that a lot more when we get to probability. For now, the important thing is just recognizing the difference between the two. And let's add on one more word that we maybe didn't talk about before, which is called a statistical experiment. This is the key. A statistical experiment gives a value to a random variable by making an observation. Okay? So this is not necessarily something we need to think of like in chemistry class or physics where we literally do an experiment in a lab or something like that. It's literally just making an observation so that I have some data. If it were student ages, asking someone their age is a statistical experiment because I'll get a piece of data from it. That's all a statistical experiment is. And remember, I need to do a statistical experiment in order to give a value to that random variable. Before that, it's just student ages, and I don't know anything about it. Okay, so I want to give kind of a... this is what things would look like in Minitab. Okay, we would have columns of data, and at the top of the column it would say what the type of data is, and then below that it would say the data. Right, so I've got age, GPA, and eye color. These are all random variables. Okay, they're all things that I could gather data to observe, but they don't inherently, right? Student age is not inherently 32, right? It's a whole collection of values from every student that I could gather data from. Same thing for GPA or eye color. I need to make those observations in order to actually get data. So remember, there's a significant difference between the actual data, which are observations, and the random variables. And what did I need to do to actually get this data for eye color? I needed to actually either, I guess, just look or ask people their eye color. Same thing for ages. I would need to actually do that experiment to get an observation. So that's how these three words, random variable, observation, experiment, are related. A random variable is kind of like a type of data that I'm recording. An observation is the actual data that I'm recording, that I've observed. And the experiment is what I do to actually get that data. Right? It could be asking someone, it could be physically measuring something. It could be actually performing an actual experiment, like in chemistry or something. But it doesn't need to be. It's just anything that gets me data is called a statistical experiment.